The cold wind howled across the valley, cutting through the silence like a whisper of fate. Mud clung to everything: branches, rocks, and hooves. The sky, once bright with morning promise, had turned a heavy gray, warning of the storm to come. Among a herd of wild horses galloping through the open field, two stood out, not because they were the strongest or the fastest, but because they were never seen apart. Storm and Shadow, brothers not just by birth, but by bond, moved in harmony like twin flames dancing in the wind. Storm was the elder, bold, muscular, with a silver-streaked mane and a fire in his eyes. Shadow, smaller but faster, was agile and cautious. Wherever one went, the other followed. Their connection was deeper than mere blood. It was forged in years of survival, through scorching droughts, icy winters, and the constant threat of predators. They trusted each other with their lives. But that day, something was different. Rain began to fall, not gently, but violently, like the heavens had torn open. Thunder cracked, echoing through the mountains. The ground trembled beneath their hooves as the herd instinctively turned toward higher ground. Storm neighed sharply, signaling Shadow to follow. But just as they turned, the earth gave a terrifying groan. The hillside above them collapsed. Rocks, trees, and a wave of thick mud surged downward like a living beast, roaring toward the fleeing herd. Horses scattered in panic. In the chaos, Storm and Shadow were separated. Storm pushed forward, charging through the rising muck, his powerful legs churning against the pull of the mud. He screamed for his brother, high-pitched, desperate. A terrified Winnie responded from behind. Shadow had been trapped. His slender legs were buried in the sludge, his eyes wide with fear. Each time he tried to pull free, the mud sucked him deeper. Around him, the flow of debris grew stronger. Trees floated by like twigs. The mudslide was far from over. Storm turned back. Most of the herd had vanished into the safety of the hills. But Storm, heart pounding, muscles aching, battled the rushing earth to reach his brother. He knew the danger. Every instinct told him to run, to survive. But another voice, stronger, screamed louder. Not without him. With a mighty leap, Storm reached Shadow's side. He bit into his brother's mane and pulled, grunted, pushed with his head, did everything he could. Shadow cried out in pain. The mud had already strained one leg. It was no use. Storm paused, panting. The mud was rising faster now. If they didn't move, both would be swallowed. But then he saw it. A narrow ridge to the right, barely wide enough for one horse to pass. A possible escape. Storm did something unthinkable. He lowered his head, nudged his brother's face gently, and whinnied a soft goodbye. Then, with a fierce roar, he reared up and slammed both front hooves into the mud around Shadow's legs, loosening the grip. He circled him, breaking the suction, ignoring the weight dragging him down. And then he pushed. With a violent surge of effort, Storm used his entire body to shove Shadow toward the ridge. The younger horse stumbled, legs flailing, but the shove was enough. Shadow found traction and leapt onto the narrow path. Storm, come on. Shadow neighed, panicked, turning back. But Storm didn't move. The mud was at his chest now. With every ounce of strength left, Storm gave one final push to steady his brother. And then the earth gave way beneath him. A massive crack opened, and Storm slipped. Shadow screamed. The last thing he saw was Storm's eyes, calm, resolved, full of love. And then he was gone. Shadow stood frozen on the ridge, chest heaving, rain soaking him to the bone. The silence that followed was deafening. No neighs, no movement, just the endless patter of rain and the distant rumble of retreating thunder. He waited. Minutes felt like hours. Then movement. From beneath a pile of debris, a muddy ear twitched. Storm was alive, but barely. Shadow cried out, rushing down the slope, but stopped short. He couldn't reach him alone. Not without help. He turned and ran, faster than he ever had before, toward the humans they once feared, toward the ranch beyond the trees. For the first time in his life, Shadow broke away from the wild. Not to escape, but to save the one who had saved him. Would they help? Would they be too late? The answer was just moments away. Shadow had never approached a human before. All his life, he'd been taught to fear them, to stay hidden, to run at the first scent of their presence. But that morning, something greater than fear galloped through his veins. Love. The rain had lessened, but the land still trembled with the aftermath of the slide. Mud puddles stretched like lakes, trees lay torn, and birds circled overhead, their cries echoing like a funeral song. Shadow galloped past the wreckage, soaked and wild-eyed, his hooves splashing through the thick, broken land. As he emerged from the tree line near the ranch, the world changed. Fences, barns, the distant smell of hay and diesel. A young boy named Caleb, no older than 10, was stacking buckets beside the stables when he saw the muddy silhouette charge toward him. His heart jumped. He dropped the bucket and shouted, "Dad, there's a horse, a wild one." Shadow didn't slow. He skidded to a halt a few feet from the boy, panting, his entire body trembling. His eyes locked with Caleb's, not with fear, but pleading. The boy, stunned, stepped back unsure. Then Shadow turned around. He neighed loudly, looking over his shoulder again and again, then taking a few steps back into the woods before stopping and turning once more. Caleb's dad, James, a seasoned rancher, came running with a rope in hand. He paused, eyes narrowing at the sight of the drenched horse. That's no tame horse." "No," Caleb whispered. "He's asking for help." James lowered the rope. "Get the trailer. We follow him." Shadow led the way. It was nearly 2 miles back to the base of the landslide. The pickup truck followed slowly behind him, its wheels slipping in the muck. Shadow trotted ahead, pausing only to make sure they kept up. Caleb sat beside his dad, silent, eyes wide. He had never seen a horse act like this. When they arrived, the damage came into full view. Trees ripped from their roots, mud covering everything, and there, barely visible, was Storm, half buried and still. James leapt out. "My God." The rancher waded through the muck and knelt by the fallen horse. Storm was breathing, barely. Cuts ran along his flanks, and one of his legs was twisted unnaturally. His sides rose and fell with labored breath. "We need to lift him out," James said. "He won't survive another hour in this mud." It took a harness, a winch, and a whole lot of hope. As the crew worked, Shadow stood watch, ears pinned, eyes never leaving his brother. Each time Storm groaned, Shadow took a step forward, his chest tightening with fear. After nearly 30 minutes, they pulled Storm free, but he didn't rise. Caleb approached slowly, brushing the mud off Storm's face. "Come on, boy. You didn't give up back there. Don't give up now." Shadow came closer. He nuzzled his brother gently, their foreheads touching. And in that moment, something shifted. Storm stirred. A groan escaped his throat as he tried to move. His injured leg shook, but his head lifted. The ranchers cheered. "He's fighting," James said, voice cracking. They loaded Storm into the trailer beside Shadow. The brothers, side by side again, were carried to safety. For days, Storm received treatment, bandages, medicine, rest. The ranch hands cared for him as if he were one of their own. Shadow never left his side. Weeks passed. Storm healed, slowly, painfully, but he healed. One evening, as the sun set over the hills, casting gold across the fields, James opened the paddock gates. "You're free to go, boys," he said, smiling. Shadow stepped forward. Storm followed, limping slightly, but strong. They paused at the edge of the field, looking back one last time. Then, side by side, they trotted off into the wild once more. But they weren't the same. They carried more than scars. They carried a story of sacrifice, of courage, of brotherhood. And for those who had witnessed it, like young Caleb, it was a lesson he'd never forget. That true love doesn't need words, it needs heart. And sometimes, it's the silent ones who show us what bravery really looks like. As the two horses disappeared into the forest, tails flicking in rhythm, a single breeze swept through the valley, as if nature itself had bowed in respect. The brotherly bond had survived, and in that survival, it had become legend.